From day one, a candidate for Carroll County Sheriff, Tony Liggett, was a detective on a task force investigating the double homicide of two local teenage girls. The task force had the full support of the FBI and state police. The superintendent gave countless interviews assuring the public that whatever resources the task force needed, well, they were available by request. The impending contested sheriff's campaign resulted in hard questions about the unsolved murder of two girls for the wannabe sheriff. But in the months leading up to the election, the only answer given to the public was that 5 years and 7 months in, they had no clue who the killer was or why the girls were murdered. On September 21st, 2022, out of the blue, Tony Liggett purportedly received a tip narrative written in 2017. The tip narrative purportedly told the tale of a lieutenant who interviewed a man claiming to be on the same trail at the same time as the girls who went missing and were murdered 5 years and 7 months earlier. An internal report would later reveal that when asked for the audio recording of the interview of the man, the lieutenant confirmed recording all interviews for the leads he was assigned, but he found no sign of the one for the specific man. After 22 days of taking no known actions on that tip narrative report, Detective Liggett took a break from campaigning for sheriff to interview the man and the man's wife. The man was surprised to get a call so long after calling the tip line to report the limited information he may have had, because he called the day the tip line was announced by law enforcement, requesting anyone who was at or near the trail anytime that day to please contact law enforcement to answer some questions so law enforcement could determine whether their information would assist their investigation or not. But when police contacted him about the information he provided 5 years earlier, he was happy to help, I imagine, same as anyone would have. The man was given his Miranda rights, considering the high-profile nature of the case after 5 years of going unsolved. The man told the wannabe sheriff and the Carroll County prosecutor's investigator, who was also there for some reason, that he believed he arrived at the trail that day sometime around noon and left sometime probably around 1:30, and that he remembered seeing a group of 3 girls, but did not speak to them or see anyone else. In a different room, his wife was asked if her husband owned any jeans, blue or black jackets or coats, and guns or knives. She was also asked how he wore his hair 5 years earlier. She told them the same answer just about every other wife in Indiana would have to give to the questions about general, common items in any home, but that he wore his hair shaved 5 years earlier, as he'd always kept it shaved since his days in the National Guard. With the explosive information that the man said he went to the trail around noon and left around 1:30, and his wife confirming he owned the exact items every man in Indiana owns, the wannabe sheriff and the prosecutor's investigator knew they had to act. Because what if the man who drove a 2016 black Ford Focus and wore his hair shaved was actually the poofy-haired male driving a 1960s Ford Mercury Comet that wasn't black? So they drew up a search warrant, leaving out those minor details, and searched the man's home that evening. They collected all the man's devices, weapons, ammo, and a bunch of clothes. The prosecutor's investigator made his second appearance that day to collect a water bottle, and the man's gun was sent to the state lab the next day. 5 days later, the task force received the results from the state lab, purportedly matching an unspent bullet purportedly collected at the scene on February 14th when the bodies were discovered, to the man's gun. The task force purportedly had their man. You would think a task force formed to hunt and apprehend the monster would go get him the moment they got evidence connecting him to the crime, but you'd be wrong. They spent the next 7 days making arrangements for him to come pick up his vehicle instead. But on October 26, 2022, when the man arrived at the outpost to do just that, another member of the task force who'd been on the case from day one, Jerry Holeman, was on site. Jerry Holeman is very familiar with unsolved cases, as he'd been on the county's only other multiple victim incident in recent history. 4 young sisters, 6 miles from Delphi, had died in a fire that was rolled in arson only 3 months earlier. 5 years ago, Jerry was assuring the public they had a super solid person of interest in the Flora fire. That case is still unsolved. Jerry, resident genius who, in his professional judgment, thought meth would go away when the economy got bad, told the man he had just a few questions he wanted to ask while he was there picking up his vehicle. Jerry had more than a few questions, and by more than a few questions I mean a hissy fit. Jerry berated the man, threatened the man, and lied to the man. By the end, Jerry was no longer in control of his emotions, and the man was under arrest. It remains unknown what exactly changed in the previous 7 days of law enforcement arranging to return the man's stuff they seized and the point of his arrest. All we know for sure is the interview was video recorded, Jerry is not once heard on audio giving the man his Miranda rights, and the wannabe sheriff won the election, 13 days after the big announcement that an arrest was finally made.
Let